Ah, what? Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. I don't remember why I knocked myself unconscious with a trombone mouthpiece, but I'm sure whatever's in my left hand will explain it. That'll do it. Well, it's that time of the year again, where I like to torture myself with a bad book. Except, I don't really look at bad books all that often. In fact, in the 100 or so episodes I've done, the ratio of good to bad books is pretty heavily leaning towards the good. Anyway, today is Star Trek's 50th anniversary, and I wanted to do something fitting for such a milestone. At first, I wanted to do something really good related to Star Trek. But then I got thinking about one of my favorite episodes I've ever made of this show, Before Dishonor. Those episodes are more than 3 years old at this point, so by my current standards, they kinda suck. But they were fun as hell to make. The episode wrote itself, and whatever new spore of stupid came out of the book was a gold mine for jokes. So I figured that, since it's a milestone, I would try to capture the same magic, and went to r/Trek books and asked about notoriously bad original series books. I got a decent amount of suggestions, but of all of them, one stuck out. Triangle. And no, I'm not talking about Peter David's acclaimed sequel to Imzadi. I'm talking about Triangle. A book featuring Kirk and Spock in a love triangle instead of Worf and Riker. This one that not only was suggested as bad by the subreddit, but also based on Amazon reviews. Let's take a look at some of those reviews so you know what we're in for. All thumbs down. Avoid this one at all costs. If you want a Trek love triangle, check out Peter David's Imzadi 2. I never thought that there would be a Trek book so bad that when given a choice between reading it and staring at a blank wall, I'd choose the wall every time. What's so terrible about this one? Farcical melodrama truly sums it up. The whole thing has the feel of a junior high school creative writing class project. Sandra Marshak and Myrna Colbreath deserve a lot of credit for all the work they did in the campaign to keep Star Trek alive, and in editing and writing several of the first Star Trek short story collections and novels. If it weren't for them, the world of the Star Trek novels might not exist. Unfortunately, while the ladies are decent editors, they prove to be mediocre authors. This book is so bad that the only way it got published must have been that an editor knew she or he was getting canned and bought the rights to this book to stick it to his bosses. But I mean, it can't be that bad. It's got to at least be better than Before Dishonor, right? Right? Before we start, I do have to mention that this novel expands upon an unused concept from Star Trek the Motion Picture, which Roddenberry included in the novelization, something called the New Humans. Basically what they are is a telepathically connected hive mind of humans, believing themselves to be the next step in human evolution. However, while more intelligent than humans, they were too aloof to be able to make first contact with other species, and have a dislike of the values of Starfleet. Now, I have no idea what bearing that's supposed to have on the book, aside from establishing that this takes place following the V'ger crisis, as the book states that the reason that Admiral Nagura kept Kirk on the Enterprise, despite the V'ger crisis being over, was to keep a symbol of individuality in Starfleet to keep the New Humans at bay. Anyway, this book was not well received. It's supposedly riddled with Mary Sue's mediocre writing and out-of-character actions and dialogue. Let's dig in, shall we? This is Triangle. cover. Well, it's not bad, it's a little boring. Actually pretty reminiscent of the Quantum Leap novels covers. Just Kirk and Spock in front of a bright reddish-orangish background that looks like a nebula or some spatial anomaly, with the Enterprise, the original pre-refit version, in the middle, which is weird since this is supposed to be following the V'ger crisis from the motion picture, which depicted a refit Enterprise. Is that a bit too nitpicky? Yes, but considering that Kirk and Spock are wearing their uniforms from the first movie, I feel like the cover designer should have known which Enterprise to use. Anyway, the title proclaims that it's a breathtaking new Star Trek novel from Sandra Marshak and Myrna Colbreth, the authors of the Prometheus design. Well, let's see if these ladies are as mediocre as the reviews said. The story opens up with the Federation Council talking to Ambassador Galbraith, the Federation ambassador to Zarin. He's requesting the Enterprise to help him bring his oneness to Zarin, part of that hive mind new human thing, and Admiral Nagura doesn't want to send it, but he has no choice and says that while he'd like to command the ship himself, the only man he trusts to get the ambassador there without causing an incident is James T. Kirk. Except that Kirk is probably the worst person in that regard, since he's been at the core of several incidents during his long career. Kirk is none too happy to be hauling the ambassador and his hive mind, and Spock is concerned that they are in the Mary Celeste sector, a sector of space where ships are known to go missing. They find a planet with a one-man ship orbiting it, and Galbraith isn't happy that Kirk is diverting his mission to go investigating. Uhura also tells Kirk that many of the ambassador's followers are very persistent in getting the Enterprise crew to join their oneness, many not taking no for an answer. Kirk laments that maybe the new humans are right, and Kirk and the others are fossils of another time, but he doesn't have time for that since the one-man ship lands, following the transmission of a message showing the pilot to be a free agent of the Federation, someone with authority to take command of the Enterprise. Kirk organizes himself and Spock into a landing party and goes to speak with Galbraith before they leave. Kirk and Spock go to the VIP lounge where Galbraith is, and Spock uses his Vulcan mental prowess to fight against Galbraith's oneness, which he tries to use on Kirk. Kirk tells Galbraith to knock off trying to induct his crew into a cult, and Galbraith tells Kirk that he's obsolete, and offers Kirk a joining with the oneness, which Kirk refuses. Kirk starts to leave, but finds that one of Galbraith's people is trying to induct Mr. Dobius, a character from Marshak and Colbreth's earlier novel, with two distinct brains, into the oneness, and Kirk and Spock get them apart before the joining can finish. After that display, Kirk has no choice but to confine Galbraith and his people to quarters, since they apparently can't not induct people into the oneness. They send Dobius to sickbay since he was in contact with the oneness, and Spock follows, as Kirk goes off on his own. Spock asks McCoy if anything is mentally wrong with Dobius, but McCoy can't detect anything, and Kirk goes swimming in one of the pools on the ship, for some reason, even though he and Spock agreed to meet in the transporter room in 10 minutes. Why doesn't he stop by the mess hall on the way to the transporter room, too? Get a little snack, because apparently he has all the time in the world during this time-sensitive mission. Anyway, he gets a cramp and begins drowning, before being saved by Galbraith, who grabs Kirk's temples before allowing Kirk to get on with his mission. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, who wants to tag along to meet the free agent and keep a tab on Kirk's condition, meet up in the transporter room to beam down to the planet. They find a lot of interesting flora and fauna, and then find the free agent, a former starship captain named Sola Thane, who apparently disappeared years ago. She explains that she's half human, half Zarin, a species with some manner of mental powers, and she returned to Zarin to figure out the answer to a question. She doesn't say if the answer was 42, though. She tells them that they just need to get her to where she needs to go fast, and McCoy observes that Spock and Kirk seem to have both fallen in love with Sola. He is more surprised about Spock than Kirk, though. Before they can beam up, though, a creature on the surface attacks Sola, and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy attempt to rescue her. She has an energy whip and uses it to fight back, but a pack of the creatures suddenly show up and attack them, injuring Kirk and McCoy. Sola and Spock drag them to her ship, and they fly it up to the Enterprise, while Sola tries to save Kirk's life. The creature poisoned Kirk, so it'll take a lot to save Kirk, and with his previous oneness encounter, he's not in the best spot. Spock is also not in a good spot, as it's been 7 years since Amok Time, and he needs to mate or else he'll die. When they get back to the ship, McCoy wakes up and Spock carries Kirk to sickbay, where he's in pretty critical condition. McCoy takes over from there, and Sola and Spock go to their duties. Spock demands that Sola lock him up, since he can't be responsible for his actions during the Ponfar, but she refuses. Spock would rather die than risk anything happening, but Sola tells him that he can't die because his death would drive Kirk into the arms of the Oneness without him. You know, Killing Time had a lot less slash fic than this. How is this the book that wasn't recalled for its Kirk-Spock slash stuff? This is way more overtly sexual. Anyway, McCoy keeps watch on Kirk and Mr. Dobius shows up again, having been taken by Galbraith's oneness. McCoy calls the bridge, but Spock isn't there, and he goes out looking for him. Sola and Spock fight over Kirk for a bit before Uhura tells Spock that there's no telling if Galbraith's party remained under lockdown, and therefore anyone could have been inducted into the oneness, meaning Spock has to assume that everyone else is in fact part of the oneness and could be used as an agent against Starfleet. Sola goes to Kirk and talks with him, revealing that female Zarans gain extra power when they have a life mate that can be used like the oneness, and that Kirk may be yet another attempt to give her that power so that it can be distorted by the totality. Another hive mind collective that is a rival to Galbraith's oneness. She also tells Kirk that she and Spock, well, is this becoming a trend of the Star Trek books we look at on this show? I think this is the third book in a row that has sex in it. Spock shows up to report and confirms what Sola said. Spock, however, tried to leave a little bit out. Kirk gets it out of him, and Spock tells him that everyone on the ship could be potentially used as an enemy force with mental powers far beyond human capability to combat, and Kirk is the primary target, and there's a secret volcano base on the planet that may contain the leader of the totality, and the ship is destined to end up like all the other ships that have entered the Mary Celeste sector. Spock withheld that information cause he didn't want to stress Kirk out even more than he already is. Kirk remembers the incident in the pool and tells Spock to run a check of everyone to see who's under Galbraith's control. And Spock also notes that when Kirk has been in danger in the past, he has sensed it, but when he drowned, Spock didn't sense it, meaning that Kirk may have already been drawn into the oneness. Sola realizes that she's a danger to the ship and to them, since her powers are amplifying the totalities, and that she must go, but Kirk and Spock won't let her. Kirk because he's afraid of what might happen to her, and Spock because logic dictates that someone wants them together, and the only way to find out why is by remaining together.
There is logic in what he says.
Live long and prosper. We'll be right back. Peace and long life. We're back. Kirk goes back to Galbraith, who tells him that there's no stopping the totality, and that Kirk being inducted is important, since he's the most individual there is, and so it would make him the perfect servant for the oneness, likening him to the story of Job from the Bible. In that degree, Galbraith asks Kirk to join with him, essentially making a deal with the devil.
Lapis, listen. Fuse with me.
Spock senses Kirk being taken and rushes down to stop him as Kirk begins to get taken, and McCoy realizes that due to the earlier attempt at inducting him, Kirk is more susceptible and he tries to warn Spock, rushing to the bridge. Sola and Spock find Kirk in the midst of Galbraith's oneness and they take them to the bridge, where McCoy is waiting, and Spock and McCoy try to rationalize that Kirk couldn't agree to undertake the oneness because of the stress, and the earlier attempt clouding his judgment, but since Kirk shows no medical signs of being unfit, he is technically medically fit. Galbraith tells Kirk that the only way to save everyone is to stop the totality, and in order to do that, he must pass a trial that the totality sets for him. The leader of the totality, Soljanov, comes aboard the ship to meet with Kirk and Galbraith, and tells Kirk that he now controls the Enterprise. He wants Sola to bond with someone so that her powers will fully manifest, but Kirk refuses to be a pawn for the totality. Unfortunately, they don't have a choice, as Kirk is transported back to the planet, as is Spock, with Sola being forced to fly her scout ship to find them to see which one she would choose to bond with, but if she does choose, they'll be falling straight into Soljanov's clutches. That leaves McCoy technically in command, since he can't be sure if Scotty is under the influence of the totality or Galbraith, and since Galbraith has a connection with Kirk, McCoy and Galbraith go off to try to locate Kirk before the local fauna does. Sola plans to go after Kirk first, as since Vulcan children undergo the Kaswan ritual, that thing that Spock almost died on as a kid in yesteryear, he has more survival instinct than Kirk, who at the moment is getting his ass kicked by cat bears. Kirk fashions a weapon from a stick of bamboo and then a regular stick, but he's not exactly in the best of shape, considering he's not quite the young Horatio Hornblower he was back in 2267. Spock is better off, but he can't find Sola or Kirk, so he's as lost as they are. Kirk takes out a cat bear, but it's still pretty hopeless. A snake attacks him and nearly eats him, but Sola shows up to save him and takes him to a nearby cave to recuperate. Kirk is pissed that Sola saved him and not Spock, because of course he is, and Spock finds himself relatively close to Sola and Kirk, before he's attacked by creatures and Sola rushes in to save him, followed by the injured Kirk. They head for the volcano, and McCoy continues using the Enterprise to scan for Kirk and Spock, since Galbraith is being less than helpful. The trio goes into the volcano, and Kirk splits off at a fork, leaving Sola and Spock going one way and Kirk going down the other, as he gets closer to Soljanov. McCoy, Dobius, and Galbraith beam down to the volcano and try to get in, using Dobius's dual mind to break the totality enough to sneak past it. Kirk finds Soljanov and demands that the Enterprise is released and Sola is set free, but Soljanov just monologues and tells Kirk that the totality is better because there will be no war, blah blah blah. Same old stuff that every hive mind villain says. Kirk says that he'll come to the totality since he's a bridge to bring the totality and oneness together if Soljanov lets everyone else go free, and Soljanov tells him that he'll consider it, though based on his behavior he's probably lying. Spock and Sola reach a psionic shield that will overwhelm Spock if he passes through, so Sola has to go it alone. Sola goes in to confront an older member of her species and is put through immense pain. That radiates in Kirk, who feels it and is overwhelmed by it. Soljanov learns of her presence and sets up the trial once again, giving Sola no choice but to bond with either Kirk or Spock and leave the other to die in the lava. They try to convince her to leave them, which she refuses, and then each try to make Sola choose the other, which she also refuses to do. Galbraith and McCoy show up, and Galbraith and Soljanov talk for a bit, as Soljanov doesn't believe that the oneness is as good as his totality, and knows that only one can exist and wants his totality to be the victor. Kirk tries to plead for the individual, but Soljanov won't have any of it. They realize that the solution to their problem is to not think about it in the sense of Sola and a mate, but Sola and her mates. Wait a minute. Is this entire book an allegory for bisexuality? Anyway, the three of them manage to survive, with Kirk getting a little boost courtesy of Galbraith. And Galbraith is satisfied that if the three of them as individuals could survive the trials, maybe individuality still has a place in the universe. However, Soljanov still wants Sola Thane, and she agrees to go off with him, leaving Kirk and Spock behind and the Enterprise back in their control. They, along with Galbraith, McCoy, and Dobius, go back to the ship, and Kirk laments losing another love, remembering Edith Keeler. He thanks Galbraith for his assistance, and they set a course for home, ending the novel. And that was Triangle. Is it the worst original series book out there? No, but it's the worst one I've read so far. Though it's not exactly bad. better word would be mediocre. It's not good, everyone acts out of character, and the book is repetitive as hell, giving us Kirk's observations on something, and then Sola Thane's imagining of what Kirk will observe. Sola Thane is kind of a bland character, and she's nothing but a love interest, with no real substance, and her vague mental powers are stupid. The book calls back the TOS episodes, but they aren't intrusive, and some are even inaccurate, with Kirk misremembering Spock's.
I am endeavoring, ma'am, to construct a mnemonic memory circuit using stone knives and bearskins.
As stone knives and bear claws, which is a minor issue, but I'm a nerd, so I'm pedantic like that. I'll admit, it was more boring than anything, and not rage-inducing like Before Dishonor. The possible bisexuality allegory is interesting, but considering that I didn't even notice it until the last 20 pages, I can't imagine it's a very good one. The slash-fic stuff was out of place, considering that the book was about Kirk and Spock fighting over a woman, but all the dialogue shows that they're in love with each other. I wasn't expecting it to be horrible, but I was expecting it to be at least one of the so bad it's good type books. I can't recommend this book to anyone. I'm sure that the authors are fine writers, considering that Prometheus Design doesn't have any reviews like this, but this is definitely a miss. I feel sort of bad. I dedicated months to this, actually waiting to read it so I could go into this review blind. And it's a crappy book with not many opportunities for jokes. Whereas Before Dishonor took me 3 days to write, this took about a week, and I don't think I had that much to play with. It wasn't a horrendous affront to Star Trek or a betrayal of my favorite characters, but it's certainly not their best outing. Maybe the Prometheus Design is better, but I definitely agree with the reviews of this that I saw on Amazon. All thumbs down. Especially if you're a Benzite. This isn't quite the video I was planning on for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. I was more hoping for blind rage, but mediocre works, I guess. The thing's riddled with spelling errors and doesn't really feel like a Star Trek story. If you want a good Star Trek love triangle involving Kirk and Spock, check out Killing Time. Plus, that one has Romulans and time travel in it. Overall, this book sucks. It's not quite Before Dishonor or Backwards, but it's definitely up there. It's the paper towns of Star Trek books. It's more pointless than anything, since no one seems to show any change except for Galbraith, who just decides that maybe the new humans can wait to take over since the old ones are doing fine. Kirk leaves the book the same way that he came in. All that's different is that he and Spock now have a love interest in common. All in all, happy 50th Star Trek. I can't believe that a sci-fi show that was so screwed over at every chance by the network managed to survive for 50 years. And I can't wait to boldly go into the next 50. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. I don't know what we'll be looking at next week, but I'm sure that it'll at least be better than this. See you next time.